Good afternoon, guys. My name is Sean Jackson. I'm Elizabeth Jackson's husband. And what I'm going to do is kind of go through a little bit of thing called email etiquette. Been doing a lot of jobs over the years. Right now, I actually work for a company called Tanium. I just switched jobs from a company called NetIQ that I worked at for 15 years, doing tech support and what's called pre-sales. I've also, before that, I was actually a faculty member at the University of Houston, taught some classes there. And what I'm going to do is some email etiquette. So I've learned a lot of things around email over the years. When I taught classes back in 95, 96, 97, I usually start a class asking some just kind of questions around, how many people use email every day. And back then you get maybe half the people kind of raise their hand. Now, who doesn't use email? It's kind of everywhere. It's prevalent on your phones, everywhere else. I would also ask a question, usually in front of people, and say, look, have you ever had a time when an email or a text got misinterpreted? And no one's going to say no. It always happens. And the reason is you can't get feedback from the person. You can't get their inflection. So a lot of times when people do emails or do texting, especially if it's bad news, you want to do that in person. You don't want to actually use text or email in those situations. A lot of times things get completely misconstrued. So what I'm going to do is go through this PowerPoint. Now, I'm doing a video, and I'll tell you what slide I'm on as I go through, and then you could follow along and kind of help understand what we're talking about here. I'll try to put in some funny stories that we did along the way and things that work. So we're on slide number 2 here, and why is email etiquette important? Well, the reason is the purpose of writing an email is you want the person on the other end to get the exact meaning of what you intend. Okay, and a lot of times what happens is the intention is they don't get the intention that you wanted them to get. So without immediate feedback, seeing their tone, seeing their body language, sometimes it can be really misinterpreted many times, and it happens all the time, right? How many family arguments has started? I mean, for goodness sakes, I think Facebook has been the reason more divorces than probably anything else, if you will, just because a lot of things just get misconstrued. Okay? I was going to tell you about the UNC Tar Heels, but I'll skip that story. I'll go on to the next one. But it's a funny story about my wife emailing somebody she used to know and him getting all bent out of shape about the Tar Heels. Anyway, so the elements of email privacy. I'm on slide number 3 right now. And here you have privacy, general formats. I'll go through each one of these kind of sequence. I'm not probably going to hit every single slide here, but I'll hit the majority of them, the big points, and I'll kind of move on. So we're on slide number 4, email privacy. And usually if I was running it, I'd ask the question, is email private? And anything you put out there, either be text, email, anything online, Facebook, it's never private. It's always somewhere. It's stored somewhere, right? And we see it every day, people breaking into people's phones or to email and those kind of things. But email is never secure. Now, you can do things around email. You can do what's called PGP, which stands for pretty good privacy, and different certificates and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, just keep in mind that the communication is not private on the line, especially like instant messaging. Those kind of things are just never private. So I'll tell you a funny story about a manager. So I was working at a company, and I was what we call I was kind of a manager. So we would get together for these manager meetings. And one manager comes in, a female actually. She was pretty technically savvy. She gets all bent out of shape, and we started talking. And something was going on internally, and she basically said, well, I know that this employee said this, this, and this. And I knew the employee. I said, how did you know that? Well, she was actually using a sniffer on the wire, and she was actually watching a instant message conversation between 2 employees, basically talking smack about her. So again, nothing's private. She was at least savvy enough to understand how to set up some things to, it's a long story, but set up things to actually do in promiscuous mode and basically watch traffic going back and forth. And she was able to watch that and watch her conversation, which was pretty funny. So what happened to the one gentleman who I work with, when it came time for a bonus or raises, of course he got skipped over because he was talking smack. Shouldn't do that. All right. I'm now on slide number 5. All right, the basics. When you look at doing email, and these kind of change over time. It depends if you're in a corporate network or not. No, it's while I'm pausing. All right. So the basics. When you go through when you're doing an email, here's some of kind of the bullet points. My biggest pet peeve when you see a new email is misspellings. And sometimes they're so blatant. It really, I'm so annoyed by it that I almost miss the rest of the meaning. To give you an example, I actually had a student turn in a report that said, I would something was the first line. And it was I would, WOOD. And I was so annoyed by that. It really hurt me even keep going into the rest of the paper because I was so annoyed. And I can't tell you how many times I see papers get turned to my wife, and people just don't do spell checkers. So there, it's easy. It's there. Pretty much every single word processing program or email application allows you to turn it on. But when you're doing them, try to keep a couple things in mind. One is, do you write a salutation each new subject email? What I mean by that is a lot of people will find an email from a previous person, just reply to it, and the subject doesn't match what they're actually talking about. Basically put in the subject what you want to talk about. It's like a title, because when I go back later and try to find it, it makes it easier to understand what the conversation was. Second one is try to keep the emails brief. I used to work with an employee, and we used to say, when you got an email from him, you got Michelzik, that was his name. He would go on and write these 3-page, diatribe emails. It usually start off with Winston Churchill once said, and he's trying to just get a point across. Most people like me is when you get this long email, you're so busy in the day working, you're not going to read the whole thing. You're tuning out. So your meaning or the purpose of sending an email is for someone to understand what you're trying to convey. And just writing this long email, it doesn't help. So try to be brief. And I always kind of use the rule of use one screen. Emails. The third bullet point: return emails within the same time you would do a phone call. Again, I used to call it email ping pong. What I used to do was tech support, and I would see a lot of my coworkers would just email, ask the customer for something. The customer said, "Well, I can't find it." They would email back saying, "Well, let's look here. Why? I don't see it there." They go back and forth with this thing I call email ping pong, where it took them 3 seconds to pick up a phone and ask a question. I already talked about grammar. On the other side, use caps when appropriate. My father, when he used to send me emails, he would send me them in all caps. And I have to explain to him that means you're shouting at somebody. So if you write something in all caps, it really is shouting at somebody. That's the one interpretation. There's also a second theory of reading that the actual shapes of the words helps you to read. And when you have everything in capital letters, they all look the same. They're all the same shape, basically. So keep that in mind when you're emailing. The third one is your call, or the next bullet point. Format your emails for plain text rather than HTML. I actually like HTML from a security standpoint, not as good. However, it looks prettier, but that's one of the bullet points I always talk about. Also use a font that has a professional look. I can't tell you. I get people sending me emails that have this funky font for Christmas or whatever, and it just makes things difficult to read, especially when you're a business context. No one wants to see your favorite Mickey Mouse kind of printing. The next ones I have for 6 and 7. This is an older screenshot of Outlook, but point being is in pretty much every single word processing application, you can find spell checking and such. You can also create a custom dictionary. So people always say, well, I don't turn it on because I, do a lot of work in medical field, and it always picks up, it always says I misspelled, MRI or something, whatever it is. That's what the custom dictionary is for. You can always add to it, but turn it on. And like I said, is your first impression, especially when you're sending to somebody new, is you want to make sure that they understand what you're saying. And when you see something misspelled, it just gives a negative start point to your whole conversation, right? If you don't know where something is in Outlook or in any other word processing program or whatever you're using, you got Google. Google search the thing. Okay, Google, how do I turn on spell checking in Outlook? I'll tell you how to do it. I can't tell you. I tell my children is how lucky they are today, is they don't really have to look anything up. It's at your fingertips. So take advantage of it. I already spoke about this. Email. Do not use capitalize unless you really mean it. If you put "call me" in all capitalized, it's interpreted a lot different than "call me" in lowercase. Call me all caps is you're yelling at me. Call me. So make sure you understand that. All right. Also, know your audience. This is really important. I'll use my wanky example. But know your audience. A lot of people will use slang in, okay, two things. Know your audience. Know who you're talking to. So, for example, I'm sending an email to my mother or to somebody older, and I put ROFL, rolling the floor laughing, or LOL, or IDK, or any of the other slang that we use today. They have no idea what I'm talking about. Absolutely no clue. So you got to understand who you're talking to. Are they going to actually understand the slang and the shorthands that we use today? Probably not. So understand that. The second thing around knowing your audience is there's some other things to think about. The one I always use is wanky example. So know your audience in the standpoint of their culture. So the wanky example, or this one actually was in the UK. So I was working at IQ, and I said something. I wrote an email out to everybody in my group, and my group spanned across both North America and into Europe. And I wrote, "This guy's being a complete wank," or something about wank. I was trying not to curse. So I said he was wanky or something. So the guy from the United Kingdom office calls me up laughing hysterically, and he says, "Wank has a completely different meaning over here, dude. Do not use that word." You can, if you want to go look it up, you can figure out what the word means. But in my case, I didn't understand. I was talking to people in the United Kingdom at the time. I should have really understood that a little bit more. All right. So over here, now we're on to slide number 8. Okay, so you want to make sure, especially when you're doing when you're doing actually emails, and this is my another personal pet peeve of mine. I always get these emails forwarded from someone saying, "Hey, can you look down and read the thread and tell me what you think?" No, I got too much things going on, and you'll get this long thread that's 500 pages long. You also will say, "Hey, what do you think?" and they won't attach in the previous conversation. There's kind of two ways to look at this. So my biggest thing is when you're actually doing preferences, make sure that you actually, and you're forwarding on something, you want to keep it short and compact. The whole point of an email is somebody gets the meaning of what you're saying. Keep things short, keep them compact, keep them to the point. And we'll get into a couple of the things that are recommended, which is the next slide, actually. That's more important. Number 9. And I'm a big believer in this, especially in a business context. When you're doing something, and when you're trying to give instructions to people to do something, you want to get a long paragraph that says, first I would do this, then I would do this, then I would do this, then I would do this. Or what is a better way to look at it, put number 1, do this, this, this. Number 2, do this, this, this. When you put it in a bulleted list, it's a lot easier for people to pick up and understand what's going on. And they're more likely to actually read it. That's the point. So I'm a big believer in using lists and bullets when you're actually doing some kind of point you're trying to make. Basically, if you remember back to elementary school or whenever we did this, or now in college, whenever you're doing something, it's almost like an outline, or you're writing instructions for steps. And just people look for lists. It's just the way people are. So putting things in a list makes it a lot more user-friendly for people to read. Right. Tone. I'm on slide number 10. When at all possible, you want to always write in a positive tone, especially in a business sense. And you also want to make it professional and not personal. If you were to call out someone's complete, if you say, and I always use this with my kids, there's an idea called separate the sin from the sinner. Okay, and it's a kind of a construct of teaching or childcare, whatever you want to say. If I said to you, you acted like a complete idiot. That's one way to say something. Or if you say to your kids, you know what, I love you, but the way you just acted, that's really not appropriate. I'm basically I'm not criticizing you as a person, I'm criticizing your behavior. So it's called separate the sin from the sinner. And you want to do that same kind of construct or same kind of ideology when you actually do a written communication, especially if you're doing bad news. So number 10 is you always want to write in a positive, hey, that was great, however, kind of thing. Not so, and the example we have here, when you complete the report, or the other way instead of saying it, if you complete the report, if you actually get around to doing something, where if you said, hey, when you complete that report, that would be great. So there's ways to actually say things more in a positive slant that comes along a lot better. And The second bullet point is avoid negative words. So begin with non or negative stuff, that kind of thing. And it is appropriate, I think, in times, and this is personally, and you'll see people saying it, to use the winks and the smiles, and it allows you to soften the tone a little bit. Those do work. The last bullet point in there is use contractions to add a friendlier tone. There actually is a theory of learning that don't is a lot. Don't, if you say do not do that, and I say don't do that, don't is actually friendlier. It's kind of interpreted as a friendlier tone than do not, believe it or not. So there actually is a theory of that, believe it or not. All right, slide number 11. You guys know these way better than I do. Here's the smileys and things you can actually use. Again, know your audience. If I was to send my dad the surprise one or the yell, or I should say my father passed away, my mother, she wouldn't understand any of what those mean. So again, know your audience though too when you're actually sending these. Number 12, general format. When you're doing emails, and instead of, I'm not going to do the first two. This is really kind of old school. The last one is kind of the most important to me, and that's another method. Use BCC. If you never use BCC, it's called blind carbon copy. Blind carbon copy. So let's say my wife Elizabeth wants to send an email to everybody in the class saying, "Hey, don't do that. Don't do X, Y, and Z." Or, "Hey, I've reviewed some stuff, and you're one of the students who needs to do this, this, and this." Another way to do some of these things where you kind of hide who you're sending it to is what you do is you send an email to yourself as a to-line, and on the BCC line you put everyone that you actually really want to send it to. And by doing so, when I get an email, all I see is Liz sent it to herself, and I don't see any of the BCC, blind carbon copy. I don't see any of those people. And what it allows me to do is hide all the other people I sent it to from knowing who the other people are in this email thread. It's actually a good way to send out some information when you don't want the people, the recipients, to understand who else got that email. It's a good way to hide that. So that's a good little trick that you'll see a lot of people use. Slide 13, email etiquette. Just when you're sending an attachment, make sure it's not completely gargantuan. And you also want to say, look, this was created in Word 97, Word 2000. I can't tell you, when I was teaching college, people would send me emails in some funky, word processing program. I'd have to go search, the extension to figure out how to open it. I shouldn't have to do that. So when you're doing an email, especially if you're using something that's really, really off the cuff, kind of a word processing program, you want to actually put in the email, hey, there's an attachment that was done in Word, perfect, Word, whatever, 2000, that kind of thing. Make it easy on the reader. Again, the whole purpose of sending an email is the person on the other side to actually read it and do something with it, right? Okay. Also, too, is when you're sending a large attachment, there's plenty of websites out there now, and just do a Google search where you can upload a file, and then send someone just a hyperlink to it, so you don't have to attach in this huge file. Especially in a corporate environment, a lot of files will get stripped out, zip files and stuff like that. If they're over a certain size, depending on how they configure the email server, if it's above like 5 meg, it might strip it out. So if you want to make sure it gets there, one way is to actually use these locations where you can upload a file to a location and then to send that third person the URL so they can go get it themselves. That kind of thing you can do. So keep that in mind when you're doing really, really large files. All right. And zip files. This is no longer really true in this day and age. But another thing you can do when you're actually having a large number of files. So let's say I want to send you 15 pictures, right? Instead of sending you the 15 pictures, I could actually attach them in a zip file. So I put them all together, I right click on my zip them, and you can look up how to do zip files. A couple things it does. It compresses the file size, and then for the user on the other side, instead of having to download 15 different items from your email, they can just download one zip file that contains everything I want to give them. All right? So zipping it up is one way to mitigate it. It really is not, I wouldn't say stripped anymore, or it's really not protected against stripping. Most of the email programs now, like Barracuda and such, actually do, or I should say Barracuda, but some other ones that do email, looking through email for detection, they'll jump into the zip files and look at them as well. So that's really not the case. But you can usually sometimes get away with just renaming the zip file, as well as password protecting it sometimes. Actually, again, it just depends on what they're using for email protection. All right, where are we on? Number 15. When you're doing, my biggest pet peeve is two things. Is when you want to discuss something private and an issue, pick up the phone. Don't do a text. Don't do an email. You want to pick it up big time. And I can't tell you, I see so many times where the fights or just arguments happen because people just don't take the time to pick up a phone and say, hey, look, here's what's going on. And I see it a lot in today's generation where we rely so much on texting instead of actually talking to people. And I can't tell you, like I said, how many times I see people arguing about silly things and whatnot. The other one, the only one that's big one in mind is the subject line. And it's the third bullet point on slide 15. Change the subject heading to match the contents of your message. And the reason, again, is not just from the standpoint, I just want to understand, a title of an email is basically the summary, so I understand what this is about. And it's really frustrating when someone just replies to a previous email that was about our trip to Las Vegas. They reply to that, and they have a completely different thread going underneath that. It just adds confusion. I don't know what the heck you're talking about. And then if I want to go back and research that or search it, it makes it really hard to find because it's under a different title, basically. When conflict arises, on the last bullet point in this page, when conflict arises on the list, speak in person with the one whom you are in a conflict with. So this is talking about sending an email to a large audience. It is not the time nor the place to sit there and have a war with somebody. If you have a conflict, if you have an argument, a disagreement, take it offline. We always say take it offline. Take it up with the person directly. Don't sit there and throw emails all over the place and get into that kind of thing. Again, pick up the phone. It's the biggest thing you can get out of this. I'm on slide 16. The only bullet point I want from this is it's okay, and it makes a lot of sense sometimes. There will be times when you have this email, especially when you're doing like a procedural email, where, hey, the new procedure to use this lab equipment is this, and this. And it's okay to have those, but it is okay too for an email at the beginning to have what we call an elevator summary. Hey, this email is intended to give you details about how to use this new tool that we have in the environment. Below is all the policies and the procedure how to use it. So at the beginning, you kind of put a summary of what this is all about, so someone doesn't have to trudge through the 3 pages to figure out what the heck you're talking about. So in really long, especially procedural kind of emails, it's okay to make what we call an elevator summary. All right. I'm going to actually skip slide 17. I'm on slide 18. This is when you're delivering bad news. My personal feeling is pick up a phone. However, there'll be times when you actually deliver bad news. You have to do it, and you have to do it over email. Okay? Deliver the bad news up front. Just be blunt and candid. When people beat around the bush, it drives me nuts. But just be matter of fact, okay? The other thing is when you're delivering bad news, or if you're in a complaint, which is the next one, I'll talk about complaints. Avoid blaming, hey, it's Bob's fault. Just deliver the facts. Here's what's going on. Here's what's wrong. But try to maintain what we call positive attitude. You will have to do it, and especially if you're doing some of the bad news. I personally, my number one thing would do is deliver it over the phone or in person. If you do have to, just try to be as positive as possible and upfront as possible. Try not to beat around the bush, to be honest with you. The next one, which is 19, is delivering bad news. Here's more of the bad news. And you kind of see these. Don't use weasel words. Avoid blaming. Deliver the news up front. That's the first one. We are unable to order new computers this quarter due to budgetary cuts. All right. Avoid weasel words. So you'll see people use really big words to try to hide what they mean. To the right, it says our pricing structure is outdated. Okay, what does the heck does that mean? And, just like I said, avoid blaming, be upfront. The next slide we're on is slide 20. When you're writing a complaint, you should, one, briefly explain, hey, here's how I got here. I got here because I did this, this, and this, and this. You definitely want to do that. Explain what you did to try to resolve the problem. If you start off just yelling, you ain't going to get anywhere. Also, if you can, offer a suggestion. Here's how I would resolve this. Because if you just throw out flaming, we call it flaming, or just spewing venom, it doesn't really get you anywhere. And you got to remember your point of why you're doing something. Writing a complaint is you're trying to get some resolution to what's going on. So offer a suggestion. Hey, that didn't work, but I think what we should do is this, this, and this. And this would give me better results because of X, Y, and Z. You want to be proactive. And like I said, offer a solution to the problem. Without that, you're just what we call flaming. You're just trying to get off your chest and throw mud at the wall, if you will. We are on slide 21. And you see here, briefly state this. These are kind of examples. Show the attempts you made so far to resolve the issue. 22, flaming emails. Flaming, if you never heard that term, flaming is, think of it as like a food fight. It's basically just throwing crap at the wall to see what'll stick, if you will. You can see a lot of times when people do flaming, it tends to just spiral out of control. When someone just got on there going, I hate this this is a frickin', and just spewing venom, it doesn't help. Take a minute, relax, calm down, and just chill. My wife will probably hit me, but I'll tell you a story. My mother-in-law, not my favorite person. So the next slide, which is 23, she wrote me a letter one time, and I have a long history with her of why, but she wrote me a letter one time. Why don't you like me? And I just started, typing because of this, this, and this. It took a second. I wrote out a whole bunch of stuff. It took a second. I actually saved a draft because I didn't want to send it yet. That's a good tip. If you're not sure about something, put it in the draft bucket. Take a minute, go get a drink or something, come back and think about it. Because I thought about it for a second, and if I send this email, I thought to myself, what good can come of this? There's no good thing come. All it's going to do is make a situation worse. Right? And that's not fair to my wife, right? So before you hit send, you ask yourself, would I say this? Would I say this to this person's face? I would have, my mother-in-law. But a lot of times, I see that all the time, and I see that a lot in this generation, is they'll just send an email or a text of something they would never have the courage to say to someone's face. They just throw it over the wall. That's not appropriate. All right. So again, when you're thinking about text or email, think to yourself, answer the question, would I say this to someone's face? If the answer is no, don't send it. All right. Also, too, is the second bullet point, calm down before responding to a message that offends you. Once you send a message, it's gone. And I can't tell you how many times I can actually tell you a really bad one where someone almost got fired because the gentleman was a different ethnicity and he said something completely HR inappropriate in an email, and he really should have been fired. I mean, he should have been fired. You can't do that crap. You gotta keep your wits about you, and you got right or wrong, or if you agree or disagree, you got to be PC, especially in a business situation. The gentleman was completely out of line of what he said. So again, he let the emotions get the better of him and said something he shouldn't have. Wanted to take it back, and let me tell you something. If you haven't figured this out, if you're on Outlook and there's a little button that says I can't remember what it says to delete the email. I think it's there's something in Outlook you can actually say try to recover that email. In other words, don't send it. It doesn't work. It's gone. Next bullet point is read your message twice before you send it, and assuming that and assume that you may be misinterpreted when proofreading. In other words, what I've done in the past, especially on something that's critical for me, is I'll stick it in the draft bucket, take a couple minutes, and come back and read it. And that couple minutes, what it does, it lets your mind reset. and it lets you kind of get a fresh perspective when you come back and look at it. It's also just as valid to have somebody else look at it before you send it. Especially if something family related or something like that. That's your wife or significant other or something like that. Look through it. Okay. On 24. When you need to flame, there are times when you may need to blow off some steam. Remember your audience and your situation before sending an email. Here's a way to flame. I actually never did this, but supposedly you actually can put it in flame on, flame off in bullets, basically letting the reader know. Sorry, bouncing. Letting the reader know that that I'm just here to spew venom. It's almost like going into a bar and talking to the bartender and just getting off your chest. So use the tag flame on, flame off. Never did it myself, but anyway. Responding to flames. My personal feeling on this one here, if you see someone, if a colleague of yours is flaming, just throwing crap at the wall, and my personal feeling was go talk to them. Again, my big thing is always go over there and talk to them, and try to calm them down, try to understand where they're coming from. Like I said, as you start getting this email war back and forth, it goes nowhere. But if you get in front of somebody, you can resolve something relatively quickly. When I did tech support, we had a team of about 15 guys, or 15 people, I should say, and I did more tickets than everybody combined, almost combined. And the reason I did it is I picked up the phone. I was a big believer. It would take me 3 seconds to ask a customer, hey, did you mean this, this, and this? Instead of going back with 2 or 3 emails back and forth, I would just pick up the phone. I was so effective and so at what I did because of that. It's just something that you just learn over time that, as much as we rely on email to do stuff, and email has a place, don't get me wrong, but definitely in situations where you're trying to, speed is of the essence, or you're trying to get customer service, as much as people like email, people still want to talk face to face. Or a bad situation, trying to deliver bad news, or whatever the case may be, is if you don't want something to be misconstrued, pick up a phone. In fact, if you look at what's happened in the news over the last couple of years, look at Sony. Those people are complete morons for actually putting that in the email. That's the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. And jokingly, one of the security guys said that they have taught us, if nothing else, Sony has taught us that when you want to say something stupid about somebody, if you want to make fun of or belittle or whatever you want to call it of somebody else, pick up a phone. Because they put it down in email, they got hacked, and all these emails went out where these executives, high-paid executives, are making fun and belittling people like Angelina Jolie and George Clooney and all that. They looked like complete morons the way that what they did, and that will cost them their jobs in the future. I mean, these are people making a boatload of money. But if anything we learn from those people, pick up the dang phone. Anyway, off my soapbox. The last, slide 26, when email won't work. There are times where you need to take discussions out of the virtual world, which is what I just said. If things become heated, if there's a lot of misunderstandings, if you don't basically want to be on the news, the best way is still to do what we call get on the phone or talk to somebody in person. Again, email is not private. Look at the people at Sony, and many others. On the internet, any of that things. Look at the people from Ashley Madison. Things aren't private, especially in this day and age where things are getting hacked every other day of the week. People getting in there, and things called APTs, which are advanced persistent threats, which are basically nation-state-backed terrorism, cyber terrorism, going after certain things. You never can be guaranteed that what you put down is never going to come up later on down the future. So even though we're young and some things we write in email can still come back and haunt you. So keep that in mind when you're sending your next email. All right, final thoughts. All right, these are a couple of my pet peeves. I really haven't seen them. It's been a long time since I've been in academia. So I've been working kind of in corporate world. Haven't really seen these much. However, when people do send me personal emails, I still get annoyed by some of these things. So one is stationery. If you haven't seen this before, If you go into stationery, like in Outlook, you can actually put a stationery background with pretty, pretty ponies and bears and stuff in the back. Don't do that. It's especially in a business context. The other thing too is it makes your mailbox blow up. Even though it doesn't seem like much, it might be 10K or 20K or whatever the size they are for the stationery. It doesn't seem like a lot, but the amount of emails I get, that would actually suck up my mailbox pretty quickly. That's unnecessary. Animated GIFs, don't see those a whole bunch anymore, but I used to get emails where people have dancing cows and stuff in the email. Bullet 3, know your audience. Again, I told you the wanky story, cultures, countries, acronyms. Best definitely know your acronyms. Especially what I do for a living, we're acronym crazy, right? Or in the military. Oh my gosh, military acronyms for everything. Know your audience. If I, like I said, not an acronym, but if I used, I'm going to do a POC. In my business, that means proof of concept. But somebody who's not in the business might not understand that. I'll also use the term a lot with my wife. She gets mad at me. So I'm going to go ahead and ping them. Ping means I'm going to send them an email. We use it as a slang for send them an email. Number 4, don't just blindly forward emails. Let me tell you the text board example. So I was working on text board. I was the manager. And one of my text board engineers, so we were open to development to take a look at something. It's for a customer issue. And the customer wrote this basically customization for our product, how to do X, Y, and Z. So the developer puts a note in the dev ticket saying, yeah, the reason this doesn't work is because the customer is a moron. He has no idea what he's doing. I mean, it was really kind of saying the customer has no business coding anything, to something to that effect. So what the text board engineer does is just copies the information from the dev ticket and forwards it on to the customer. Never even read it, just forward it on. I mean, I got to get on the phone with the customer because I'm the manager and listen to this guy go off on me for a little while. I kind of chilled him out. He kind of laughed at the end, but it was a bad situation. It's just the foolishness of him not to read the email before he sent it on. Anyway, the last bullet point. Take advantage of the draft bucket. I already told you the mother-in-law story. If you're heated, if you're emotional, and you shouldn't be, especially in a business context, you shouldn't be that. It's just business. We're just trying to get things done. But if you are getting upset, take a second, put it in the draft bucket, come back to it later. Nothing wrong with that. And when you come back in a couple minutes after a 10-minute break or whatever, you always come out with a fresh pair of eyes. And a lot of times you go, yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that. At the end of the day, you want your emails to be understood, and you also want them to be understood in the way you want them understood and not misconstrued. That's kind of the gist. So this whole thing about email etiquette is all around, most of it's common sense, right? But it's all around making sure that at the end of the day, that the email you send to people is interpreted exactly the way you want to. That's it. And thank you for your time today, and good luck out there. Thanks.